And then the one who was counseling was called me and said, you know, now she's just calling me and telling me stuff, and there's really not, it's just stuff that she already knows what to do, but it's just difficult. And I said, well, at this point, you need to cut it off because it becomes gossip. You know, all you're doing is listening, and there's no sense of, okay, now this, have you thought about it this way? Would you approach it this way? If there's no sense of problem solving, then you really don't need to be hearing about another person's problems with their husband or whatever. Do you see what I'm saying? So at that point, she had to tell her, you know, unless it's something that you need me to solve, I really don't need to hear. I really don't. It makes me, it was giving her a bad feeling towards her husband. She's only hearing one side, feeling towards the other woman's husband. Do you see what I'm saying? So you always need to help with the idea of problem solving, not just listening. Talk with biblical action. Okay, page 2.9. Is there a problem? He just talks about not making more of things than they really are. Let's see. Basic approaches. He talks about extensive and intensive approach. I think you can read that pretty much. The extensive approach on page 255 is pretty much a lot of that. It's talking about the difference in just asking a bunch of questions and then entering the back door of a problem. You know, seeing inconsistencies. A lot of that you get through the PDI. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. That a lot of the questions on the PDI may seem unrelated to whatever the person thinks their problem is. But if you ask all those questions and if you see inconsistencies, those things that just don't seem to add up, then mark them, and then you can ask questions and sometimes kind of enter the back door of a problem. Or intensive approach where someone says, this is my problem, boom, and you hit it head on. There are just two, he just talks about those two different ways of looking at problems. Any questions on that? All right. Ways of gathering data. Talks about, okay. This is, in this section, I think is probably the most important point of this whole, to me, this whole reading. On page 267, he makes a kind of a simple statement, but it's really profound when you look at it in depth. On the second paragraph of page 267, the second full paragraph, he says, counselees frequently, usually, confuse responsibilities. Like Adam and Eve blaming each other and God, etc. And he goes and explains it. Now, then if you go about 6 lines down, he says, in the early counseling sessions, therefore, it is important to sort out the proper responsibilities to determine who is really responsible for what. This is really, really important. And I go over this over and over again, and it's important for myself as well as others. I mean, I do the same thing. And I'm always saying, and we've talked about it before, that you need to draw a line in a relationship. A person is struggling in a relationship. You draw a line and you say, okay, my responsibilities are on this side. My husband, sons, daughters, whatever, mother's, father's responsibilities on this side. And you never cross that line. And when you cross the line is a lot of times when you get into trouble. And you hear things like from a wife, well, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? I think back at the woman, and many of you heard this story. The first time I was really confronted with this was a woman who came years and years ago from outside the church, and she had all this conflict with her husband. One of the big things was her kitchen floor was rotting through. Do you all heard this story? And she said, what am I going to do? He won't. He says he does. He says he'll do it. And I keep asking, I keep telling him to call the person to come fix it. And he says, no, I'll do it. So every day I tell him, I say, well, look at his kitchen floor. It's rotting through. And I'm going to call so-and-so. And he says, no. And so I'm supposed to submit to that? And I asked her, I said, tell me, what is the worst thing that can happen if you don't ever say another word about it? Is that your responsibility? Has your husband committed to fix the floor? Yes. Does he already know that you want it fixed? Yes. Then when you tell him again, are you really giving him new information? No. Okay? So, is it your responsibility to tell him again and again and again that you want it fixed? Well, no, I guess it's not. Okay, what is the worst thing that can happen if you don't say anything and you just rely on him to fulfill his responsibility? She said, well, the kitchen floor will fall through. I said, so? You gonna die? She said, no. Is anybody else gonna die? No. So you have a hole in the kitchen floor. Whose responsibility is that? Well, it's his. Let it be his. She said, okay. So from that point on, she never said another word. And you know, within 3 weeks he had it fixed. She quit nagging. She quit going over into his responsibility. This kind of stuff. It was not her responsibility. Now, there are certain things that are your responsibility. For instance, she told him what was wrong. And if he had said, why don't you call so-and-so to come fix it, then that would have been her responsibility to call that person. But he didn't say that. He said, I'll do it. And then she started. Okay? You see the importance of that? Staying within your own area of responsibility and saying, you know, the worst thing that can happen is, and sometimes this gets a little tricky. Because I had, one time one of the problems was the husband wouldn't buckle up the kids. And see, here you run into a law thing, and you run into a safety thing. But you know, I lived my whole life without being buckled up. No, I think you have to buckle up kids. Okay, and I think it's wrong that the husband shouldn't buckle up the child. But the bottom line is, the reason the man wasn't buckling up the child is the first time he didn't do it, the wife was, nay, you need to buckle up the child. Men, and I'm telling you, and I'm not saying it's right, but as soon as you start this, they will do extreme things to prove their authority, which they don't have. Because if you have to prove it, you don't have it, right? But sometimes men will do bizarre things, like, my husband is doing such and such and such, it doesn't even make any sense. Well, it doesn't make sense to him either. He's doing it he's living in reaction to the woman, okay? He's doing, oh yeah, she wants me to do this, I'll just show her. Well, and so, you know, I said, I know it's illegal. I know that there's always a possibility that your child might get hurt, but just zip it. If he's driving and he's the head of the house and something happens, it's his responsibility. Well, she zipped it, and within a couple weeks he was buckling up the kids. Now, you know, he shouldn't do that. I agree, but I can't change him. She can't change him. And so, you know, sometimes there's a risk. But you need to stay on your side of the line. Almost in your mind, just picture a line. And when you start to go over it, say, nope, not going to go there. Okay? Does that make sense? I know you relate to that. You are just as much a sinner as I am. And we all cross over that line. Eve did. Was it her responsibility to be making her own decisions about eating that fruit? No. It wasn't hers at all. It was her husband's. It was God's. God did. Anyway, that's another story. But any questions about that? He says, page 268, the second paragraph, first sentence, that a counselor is responsible to do what God says, regardless of what others may or may not do, often is one of the hardest things for her to understand. But if I do this, if I don't do it, whose responsibility is it? But if I don't do it, nobody will do it. So nobody do it. So nobody do it. So what's going to happen? What's the worst thing that can happen? And often you'll find out the worst thing that can happen is maybe not so good, but it's not going to kill anybody. Now, he's going to push somebody off a cliff. You know, that's different. Okay? But so this to me is critical in really all relationships. And I think husband and wife, mother and father and children. That's my parents' responsibility. That's not mine. When my kids were little, I used to always say, you know, my kids are just confused. They think that they are in charge. They would get their roles. You know, they would think that they were and my sister used to say with her 4 girls, she'd say, they just have to, as long as they can remember that Dad's the king, I'm the queen, and they're the subjects. Then everything runs smoothly. But when those roles get mixed up, then we have problems. And it's the same idea, that they're crossing over, they're forcing things, rather than saying, well, that's not my responsibility. Staying within their own little box of responsibilities makes life so much easier. So, any questions or comments on that? Confessions. Confession. Oh, true confession. We're going to have a confessional booth set up out here in the entrance.
I guess I don't understand the part where if it's a danger to my children. I mean, the buckling up thing, maybe that wasn't...
Well, I mean, that's where it gets gray. The danger to children. Yeah, that's where it gets gray.
Isn't it also my responsibility to buckle them? Or couldn't I say, well, honey, I'll be glad to take on that, or can I?
Absolutely.
Or let us buckle, or, you know, I mean, instead of just kind of letting it go. I guess that's what I'm struggling.
Absolutely. And in that case, you would say, but you're not saying, don't you know we're supposed to buckle these children? I'm buckling them up. And he says, leave them alone. Yeah, so they'll be fine.
I'm telling him what to do.
You're telling him. That's exactly right. And you're right. It can get into kind of gray areas. But you know, I was just reading this morning in my devotions about Sarah in 1 Peter, and it says that you, to his daughters, you are, if you, he's talking about honoring Abraham, calling him Lord, if you, I can't remember how it goes, obey him without fear. Is that's what drives women a lot of times. If I don't do it, what's going to happen? It's that fear that something's going to happen to me. And so if you will stay, my premise is you can't control people anyway. If it worked, I would have a hard time convincing you. You know, if it really worked, then I'd have a hard time convincing you that this is the right thing to do. But it doesn't work anyway. So the thing is to say, okay, this is not my responsibility. I'm going to stay within my role. I'm going to obey God within my role and let God work. And that's exactly what happens. I've seen it happen over and over and over again. But I agree with you. That's why I almost hesitate to bring up that example, because there is a little danger factor there. But if you say, you know, I'd be glad to take on this responsibility and make sure that, is that all right with you? And he's kind of thinks he's God, kind of, and he says, no, leave him alone. And then you say, okay, you're the head on, and you take a risk. But that's not a huge risk. And it's a risk, but it's not, you know what I mean? That's not like saying, they don't push them off the cliff. You know, I mean, it's not that. So you have to weigh your risk. There are sometimes risks. You can't let fear be your guide there. So, but I agree. There are some gray areas there that you have to answer to God. You have to be sure that this is serious enough that I'm going to go against the authority God has set up in my life. And if you can say that before God, then that I would not judge a person for that. I would say, you know, that's just between you and God. So, okay. Don't scratch your nose. I might think you're racing. I was calling on Judy. Scratch your nose. All right. So that was a really important point there. This talks about including people, not talking about their backs. In general, and another thing, on page 270, about the middle, he must spend his time talking about the person who's there, not about the person who's not there. If a woman, I had a woman one time say, I want to come talk to you, but my husband doesn't want me to. So I didn't tell him, and I said, okay, well, I won't talk to you. She said, what? No, I want you to go home and tell him that I would not talk to you because he said he didn't want you to. And she's like, you mean? I said, yeah. And she went home and told him, well, I asked her to talk to me. She wouldn't because I told her that you didn't want me to. And he said, oh, man, he ended up visiting the church. I thought, wow, that made a big impact. And finally, he said, okay, we'll go ahead and talk to her. I was safe. I wasn't going to talk about him behind his back. Because, and pretty much, I will say, if I talk with a woman, I'll say, look, you can't change him. All you can change is you. And I'm not saying you never mention his name, you know, or you don't know what the background is, but you don't spend your time saying, well, he just needs to do this, and he just needs to do that. You're only seeing from one perspective, and you can't change, you need to convince people that you're helping you that all you can do is change yourself. You can't change other people. It does not work. And like I said, if it did work, I'd have a hard time convincing you not to do it. Okay? Any comments? To add on that?
I
think that's the main issue there, the main important point. If anybody has to add, anything to add on that? All right, I have a couple of handouts here, and one of them is just going to be real brief. We'll talk about, if y'all wouldn't mind passing these back. These are things that we use. I'll be honest with you, I don't use this very often because usually when you're dealing with one, I don't know why I don't use it very often. Usually I talk through these things, but this could be, I think this could be most helpful in dealing with children or dealing with someone who has sinful anger but doesn't really understand what's setting them off or doesn't understand the issues behind it. And most of the time, rather than use this, I talk it through. But actually, this could be very helpful depending on your style and what you do. So if you notice here, this is a journal of upsets, and a little hole in there took the of out. But this is a journal of upsets. And if you're dealing with someone with sinful anger and they just have outbursts of anger, sometimes it's helpful for the week as homework to say, okay, this week I want you to, every time you have an outburst, what you do is, let's say Monday at noon, I have an outburst of anger. You put a little 1 there, okay? That's the first one for the week. Then on the back, if you'll notice, there are some columns, and you make the person, this would be good for really mother and child, what triggered the upset. In other words, I was watching TV and my sister took the remote and I blew my top or whatever. Okay? What did you think? What were you thinking? She has no right to take my remote. I was here first. Okay? What did you do? I grabbed it from her and clobbered her over the head. What did you want? I wanted my way. I wanted the remote. Okay. Now, you notice here, the emphasis is about how did you feel about that? When she took the remote, how did you feel? Well, I felt, anxious, and it doesn't matter how you felt. I mean, I'm not saying feelings aren't important, because feelings do show us that some things are wrong or right or whatever. But the focus here is on what? What did you, it's not what did you feel. What you do, but what is behind what you do? What drives what you do? What you think. Okay? So the thinking is, I can't change, and we talked about feelings before, I can't change the way you feel. I can't say, well, just stop feeling that way. I feel so violent, well, stop feeling that way. I could say that forever and ever, I can't change it, but I might be able to change the way you think by saying, now, why are you thinking that? Why are you thinking it's your right because you had it first? What is behind that? And then you can deal with that. You can deal with selfishness, esteeming others as better than yourself, the fact that she sinned against you, now you're sinning against her, now we have two sinners. There's all sorts of stuff. You talk about maturity and that sort of thing. So then, of course, you would do it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have space here for 7 upsets for the week. And see, this something like this provides, if you have a situation like that, and again, I'm telling you, I rarely have used this, but this provides great discussion for the next time you meet with a person. Okay, let's look at what happened. A lot of times I'll have people keep a journal. I'll say, every time you do such and such, or every time you tend to do such and such, I want you to put that off, memorize this first, and do something else, and I want you to write down what it was. And it's a similar thing. And then we'll go through them one at a time. Okay, does that make sense? So you say, okay, the first time now, what should you have done? You can go through scenarios and kind of practice with the person. Does that make sense? Okay. So any questions on that? Or anything to add? Journal of upsets? like to talk about is communication. Communication. I have handed out some verses, so those of you who have the verses, if you can be ready to read those when they come up. I think a lot of times what we're talking about really is relationships, because that's where most of the problems come in. People have problems with relationships. We're all sinners, and we all want our own way. And a family is a bunch of sinners living in one house that every single person wants their own way. And the dynamic of that can really get confused, can really get complicated. Okay? So, but I think that communication, and I really believe this, that if people can communicate, it doesn't matter how different you are or how the difference of age, difference of personality, interest, none of that really even matters that much if you know how to communicate. If you can communicate, you can work through anything. Okay? And that's why we're going to look at Ephesians 4:25 through 32 and talk about the 4 rules of communication. Again, it's a little difficult if you're dealing with a woman. This is really most effective to deal with two people, the two that are involved in the problem, whether it be a child, mother and child, father and child, well, whatever, mother and father. But nevertheless, I think there's really some important principles here. So let's look at Ephesians 4:25 through 32, and I'll read that. Therefore, putting away lying, let each one of you speak truth to his neighbor. For we are members one another. Notice this is right under the section that talks about putting off and putting on, we talked about earlier. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down in your wrath, nor give place to the devil. Let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, and he have something to give him who has need. Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking put away from you with all malice. And be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you. So, we have in verse 25 here, but therefore putting away lying, let each one of you speak truth. Be honest. That would be the first rule. And that would include any kind of deception. Any kind of, whether it's by not saying something, by misleading, by whatever. Be honest. Stop lying. Any dishonesty is out. As soon as dishonesty enters into a relationship, the relationship is on its way down, and it cannot continue. When we lie, we mimic Satan. We mimic Satan. Let's look at John 8:44.
You are of your father, the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources. He is a liar and the father of it.
That's right. So we're mimicking, we're almost saying Satan is our father. I'm not saying they're an unbeliever, because there are believers who lie. But when you do, you're mimicking Satan. When you think of how important it is to tell the truth, when you think of Jesus Christ himself said, I am the Word. He is the Word. God identifies him. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. God identifies himself as the Word. He spoke the world into existence. And it wasn't until Satan came and introduced a twisting of that speech, of that word, that he is the father of lies. God has nothing to do with lies or deception. Satan just shades the truth a little differently too. That is not of God. So this does not. Let's look at Proverbs 10:19.
When words are many, sin is not absent, but he who holds his tongue is wise.
Okay, this does not mean you tell all. This does not mean you tell. There's a tendency today within the Facebook generation. Marsh preached a message on this. How many of y'all heard that about the message on Facebook? And I can't remember the points, but something like you think you're more important than you are, and you tell more than you should, and all these points. Is that there's a tendency to tell all, and that is not wise. That is not scriptural. Even when you get married, that doesn't mean you tell your husband everything. If you had things in your background that you want that you've been given, you don't go telling all what you're doing. It's not. You ask yourself, is it true? Yes. Is it kind, and is it helpful? True, kind, and helpful, or necessary and helpful would be the same. So it does not help to tell all. And Proverbs associates telling all with a foolish person. What is that saying that says something about I'm going to keep my mouth shut and appear to be wise, or open it? What was that? And remove all that. What was that? Did anybody know that? Look at that. No, I'm thinking of a different.
Abraham Lincoln.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking of. But there's a proverb that's similar to it. So I'm not saying you tell all about yourself to everyone or to anyone necessarily. So, and on the other hand, this is not, or actually this would be the same thing. This is not an excuse for venting. Let's look at Proverbs 29:11.
A fool uttereth all his mind, but a wise man keepeth it till afterwards.
Okay, a fool utters his whole mind. People sometimes feel like they kind of almost think that if they don't tell all, that they're not being honest, that they're covering up or something like that. That is not true. It's not wise to vent, to let it all, blah, 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 and hurt people and that sort of thing, if it's not true, kind, or necessary. Sometimes it's just better not to say things. And I always, there's sometimes when you might, and we know this intuitively, that you don't go up to somebody and say, "Hi, it looks like you're gaining weight." What an ugly outfit. Is it ugly? Yeah. Okay. Is it kind? No. Is it helpful? No. And what's really awkward is when somebody comes up and says, "How do you like my outfit?" And then you go, "Why?" So that's a different story. But don't offer, just any advice or say whatever you want. Think, well, if I can say what I want, then you can. Because that's what Proverbs calls foolish. Any comments on that? Or a subdued group? Confessions? What's that?
So we're afraid to say anything.
Afraid to say anything? I should have said that. That was not helpful. Okay, the next one in verse 26 and 27. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down your wrath, nor the place of the devil. Keep current. Keep current. Be angry does not mean to lose self-control. The only time that anger is righteous anger is when someone else is being violated, or God's reputation is at stake. Think of Christ in the temple when he threw out the money changers. He wasn't angry for himself. Oh, they're making me look bad, right? He was angry for the reputation of his Father in heaven. He did not lose control. Losing control is sinful anger. And what does James say? Can anybody think of a verse about that? About the wrath of man. What's that? What's that? Does not achieve the righteousness of God, right? Man's sinful anger does not accomplish God's will. It's not part of his program. Okay, so be angry does not mean lose self-control. Number two, anger is a very useful emotion. It's really pitiful when someone is so laid back and whatever that nothing bothers them. That is hard for me to tolerate, and it's hard to motivate people. When God's standard is violated, people are hurt, and you hear about abortions, and you hear about that should make you angry. Notice I didn't say that should make you out of control, but that should make you angry. And if it doesn't, then you need to take your temperature or something, because God wants us. That is an emotion that God has given us to motivate us to action. Okay, not to get out of control or hurt people. Okay. So anger is not sinful, but most of our anger is sinful. 99.9%. When I get angry, I don't even remember the last time I got angry because God's reputation was at stake. It's always my reputation. Or it's always, something that I didn't get. Something I wanted I get, or something I wanted that I didn't get, or something that somebody took away from me, or something like that. And I get angry. So most anger is sinful. But anger in itself is not. So where it says here, nor give place to the devil, give place means give the opportunity to defeat you, base of operation. When I was about 12 years old, we lived in the Philippines, and I lived on a little naval base, Sangley Point. It's no longer something else been given back over to the Philippines, but it was this little naval base that was just the length of an airstrip, and it was a base of operation for the U.S. Navy and well, not Air Force. It was another air base, mainly U.S. Navy. Here you have this country, and you have this little base of operation that they were that they had the rights to. We had the rights to, and ships would be coming in and out and all that sort of thing. And that's kind of the idea of what we do when we have sinful anger, that we give Satan the rights, almost like he's got a little base of operation there to do his work, because it does not achieve God's righteousness. All right? Any questions, comments on that? Number 3, and if you look back at verse 15, it says, speaking the truth in love. Verse 15 says, speaking the truth in love may grow up in all things in him who's the head, Christ. And then in 29 and 30, it says, let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. Corrupt communication is off limits. Unwholesome words. The idea, and I'm told, and I really haven't looked this up, my husband says that this actually means hurling insults. The idea of hurling rotten tomatoes at a person, and splats all over them. That's corrupt communication. Throwing words at a person that just tear them down. Because you notice it says, let no corrupt word, but what is good for necessary edification. What is edification? Building up, helping a person grow. Okay. Number 1, avoid inflammatory words. What are inflammatory words? Anybody? What's an example?
Words that stir up the situation.
Words that stir up the situation. Like,
You always, never.
always. You always do this. Is that true? Probably not. Or, you never take me out, or whatever. Is that true? No. never. No, first of all, it's not true. But secondly, what can a person say to that? I mean, how can if I say, well, you always do that, that's hopeless. Well, then I might as well just continue doing it. Because you haven't given me any hope for change. So always and never. Words that like, well, it really offended me when you said that idiotic thing. All right, I just used an inflammatory word. I could have said when you said that hurtful, that what you said was very hurtful. Instead, I used an inflammatory word when you said that idiotic thing. And then the person gets all mad and you say, well, I was just telling you. I was just confronting you when you use an inflammatory word. Any words that, for husband, wife, or child, parent-child, any words that communicate disrespect are inflammatory. Any words that communicate disrespect, because that has to be the basis of your relationships. And that's where you have number 2, avoid disrespectful words. We have a lot of verses on that, of children obeying their parents, and wives respecting, honoring their husbands. And when children show disrespect, that in itself is inflammatory for a parent. It's a huge stumbling block. And same thing with husband and wife. Okay? Comments? Questions? And B, use edifying communication, i.e. words that build up. We already talked about that. And ask, is it helpful? If not, it is selfish. It kind of feels good. So for your thought, ooh, if I ever get a chance to talk to that person, I'm going to say this. I'm going to say that. Now, are you thinking that, and I know you have, because I know I have. Are you thinking, oh, that'll really help that person grow? No. What are you thinking? That'll make me feel better. And it takes a lot of spiritual maturity to hold back and to not say something because that's not helpful. That's not going to help that person. This is selfish. This is all about me. This is all about making me feel better, unloading my anger, my sinful anger on this person. Okay, so we have be honest, be current, and then number 3 would be attack problems, not people. You attack problems, not people. When there's a problem, you look at a problem, you say, what is causing this problem? What do I want? What do you want? What are we doing? What should we be doing? And you start attacking problems like that rather than, well, you never, and you always, you're just this, and you're just that, and all this simple language spewing out does not accomplish God's will. Attack problems, not people. Okay? I think y'all are all really guilty, or I'm just really teaching this great, no questions. I think you're guilty. Okay. So number 4, act, don't react. Act, don't react. There's a great little book that had y'all. How many of y'all read that little book? Your reactions are showing. It is a great, and unfortunately it's out of print. But if you ever find it, let me know. You can actually find it online, I think. Your reactions are showing. It's a great book. And what is the point of it? Do you remember, Lynn? Your reactions are showing that you don't know people by their actions.
Yeah, by their reactions.
That's right. I don't know you, really, who you are, by the way you act. Because we all come to church, and there's nothing wrong with acting nice at church. I mean, I don't want you, being mean. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying it's phony. It's not. You don't really know me because everything I'm doing here for class or everything I'm saying is I'm kind of prepared, And when I talk to you out there, those are kind of planned actions. But you know your other people and yourself by the way you react. Okay? You think you're a servant? You wait till somebody treats you like one. Then how do you react? You're not a servant. You've learned to serve. You think you're submissive? It's probably just because nobody's challenged you on it. Nobody's made you do something that you don't want to do. One girl told me, yes, submissive, as long as I agree. Be submissive. So a lot of times, in fact, all the time, you know people by the way they react, not really the way they act. And the same goes for yourself. Have you ever reacted to something? Somebody does something, and you just in you, and you think, where did that come from? Well, that's your heart. That's your reaction. That's what's in your heart coming out. And it's very interesting. And you might say, it's just not like me. Oh, yes, it is. That is you. You say, well, this such and such happened, and she just blew up, and it's just not like her. Oh, yes, it is. What happened is you got a glimpse of what was on the inside. And I'm not saying you should go around judging other people by the way we react. I'm saying you need to judge yourself when you buck at certain things that you know you should do or shouldn't do, or somebody makes a demand on you. Sure, everything's going great. Everything, when the kids were young, everything was great at our house as long as you didn't make any demands on anyone. You know, everyone, what a nice, happy family. Everyone's, and then it's like, okay, time to clean up. Let's get our chore charts. You know, they all react. And as soon as you make demands, boy, all that junk would come out. I heard one fellow, maybe you've heard this, talk about the fact that we're kind of like tea bags. You ever heard this? They're like tea bags. We just look great. You smell good. Then you put it in hot water, what happens? All the junk comes out, all that dark. Everything that's on the inside starts to seep out when you put it in hot water. And that's the same way we are. You're fine. Oh yeah, we're all fine. This is fine. Happy, you know, have a good time, have the reception tonight, everyone's be happy and everything. Put you in hot water, then we'll see what you're made of. And we're all like that. So we have, let our bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice, and be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, only if they're kind and tender-hearted to you. Oh, no, rats! That's not what it says. It says, how are we supposed to be kind and tender-hearted? Even as God in Christ forgave you. God was tender-hearted to us. He was kind to us. While we were yet sinners, He died for us while we spit in His face. And that's increased my faith, Lord. How in the world am I supposed to do this? Put off reactions in verse 31 are destructive to self and others. As we said, the wrath of man does not achieve the righteousness of God, James 1:20. Put on actions. Verse 32, build up yourself and others, help you to grow, help others grow rather than tearing people down and fragmenting relationships. And then C, forgive one another. And again, ask, has anyone hurt you worse than I hurt Jesus Christ? You know, you think of the parables about the parable about the man who did not forgive and the servant. And isn't that us? We've been forgiven so much, and yet we want to hold on. We don't want to forgive others. Instead, we want to get angry, tear them down. So, 4 rules of communication, very, very important. And you know, even in a relationship, say a husband-wife, if you're dealing with a woman, even if only one side changes, even if just the woman changes, she can change the relationship. She can change the marriage. If only the child changes, and I've seen this, where I've given a child rules. I said, okay, this week you are not allowed to defend yourself. Okay? You are not allowed to, and I gave them rules. Just for this week, I want you to see what happens. Totally changed the way she was responding to her parents. Totally changed their relationship. Yeah, she had to practice. Okay? But these things these principles do work, and there's no excuse. You don't say, well, if she would do it, then I would do it. No. I'm responsible, God. You are responsible, God. You are the person. Gosh, remember what we said. The hardest thing is to realize I'm responsible to obey God no matter what the other person does. Right? Okay, let's pray. Father, help us to communicate in ways that are pleasing to you. Father, to love others, to forgive, to not say all, Father, to hold back, to all of these things, as many things that you've given us, Father, is so hard. And yet, we know that our wrath does not achieve your righteousness. And so I pray that you give everyone here direction and wisdom as they seek to hold these 4 rules of communication